The restaurant's floor was polished to a mirror sheen, yet no one wanted to be seen walking toward table 7. Not the junior waiters. Not the senior staff. Not even the manager, who kept finding excuses to busy himself at the front desk. It wasn't because the man sitting there was a celebrity, though his face had been in the news more times than the local mayor's. It was because of how he treated people. The billionaire leaned back in his leather chair like a man surveying property he already owned. His silver cufflinks caught the light every time he gestured, a small controlled flick of the wrist that carried all the arrogance of someone who had never heard the word no. When the busboy placed a water glass too close to the table's edge, the man didn't simply move it. He let it topple. Shards on the floor. A single cold statement. Try harder next time. The boy wasn't the first to walk away from this table swallowing humiliation. But that day, at 1:17 p.m., with the lunch rush humming, a single mother named Alicia Carter stepped forward. Her colleagues shot her looks as if to say, "Don't do it, he'll destroy your shift." She ignored them. Not because she didn't know his reputation. She knew it too well. But the rent was due, her daughter needed new shoes for school, and she'd already swapped shifts twice this week. This was the only table open. And more than that, though she wouldn't admit it yet, there was something in her that refused to let him dictate the rules of her day. She approached with measured steps, menu in hand. Before she could greet him, he said without looking up, "Finally, someone brave enough to come over, or just desperate enough." The words were a test, the kind designed to shrink a person before they'd even begun. Alicia felt the familiar rise of heat in her chest, the sting of being underestimated before she'd spoken a single word. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she placed the menu gently on the table, keeping her gaze level with his. And with the calm tone she reserved for customers who thought they owned the air around them, she replied, "Let's just make sure you leave here with exactly what you came for." It was instead defiance in her voice. It was assurance. He smirked, the kind of smirk that said he was already planning his next cutting remark. But something in her tone made him pause for half a breath. That pause would change everything. She didn't know it yet, but this single exchange would not just shape her day, it would flip an entire hierarchy on its head. Alicia Carter had never planned to work in hospitality. At 19, she was studying behavioral psychology at a community college, fascinated by how small shifts in tone, body language and timing could alter the outcome of an interaction. Her dream was to work in organizational consulting, helping companies repair toxic cultures before they broke people. But life has a way of teaching theory through reality. Halfway through her second year, her boyfriend, the one who'd promised stability and partnership, left. Left the state, left his responsibilities, left her with a 6-month-old daughter and no financial cushion. The scholarship she'd fought so hard for evaporated when she had to cut her course load. Rent came due every month, regardless of personal dreams. And so she pivoted. Hospitality wasn't her dream, but it was her classroom now. Every shift was a living lab in human behavior. She learned how to calm a furious diner without giving up an inch of dignity. How to keep her voice level when someone tried to provoke her into a mistake. How to spot the difference between someone having a bad day and someone who thrived on making others feel small. By her third year at Westbridge Sit's only high-end restaurant, she'd seen every type. The anxious over-tippers. The quiet romantics. The entitled elite. But the man at table 7, Marcus Vail, was in a category all his own. A self-made billionaire from the tech sector, he was the kind of man business magazines called uncompromising, which often meant cruel without consequence. He didn't just demand service. He demanded submission. And the staff had learned to give it. Not because they respected him, but because the fallout from not doing so was worse. Complaints to management, scathing online reviews, and whispered calls to the restaurant's owner. A single run-in could cost someone their shifts for weeks. Alicia had managed to avoid him for months. But that avoidance carried its own price. She'd been covering undesirable tables, taking late shifts, and losing tip income she couldn't afford to lose. That morning she made herself a quiet promise in the mirror. No more dodging. She didn't frame it as a fight. She framed it as holding ground. Psychology had taught her that bullies often operate on one thing, the expectation of compliance. Remove that expectation, without escalating, and you change the dynamic entirely. Still, she hadn't yet met the full force of Marcus Vail's game. And at 1:17 p.m., walking toward his table, she was about to. Marcus Vail didn't open the menu. He didn't need to. He came here often enough to have his favorites memorized, and to expect they'd be ready the moment he deigned to order. He glanced at Alicia, like someone checking the weight of a coin. "You sure knew." I've been here 3 years, she replied, evenly. His eyebrow lifted, an almost imperceptible flicker of surprise. Huh? Must not have made much of an impression. The line was deliberate, sharpened to see if it would pierce. Alicia felt it land, but she didn't react. She took out her notepad. What can I get started for you? He leaned back, smirk widening. Let's test you. I have the ribeye rare, but I want it warm rare, not cold in the center. And if it sits wrong I send it back. Oh, and make sure the wine sits decanted exactly 17 minutes before serving, not 16, not 18. Alicia knew the math. 17 minutes was unreasonable for the current pace of the lunch rush. If she tried to meet it exactly, she'd have to drop other tables, which would cost her tips. If she ignored it, he'd use it as ammunition to humiliate her. This was the fork in the road. Option 1. Nod, say yes sir, and hope to survive the shift with minimal damage. It would be the safe play, the one most of the staff had chosen before. Option 2. Hold her ground without open defiance, a calculated balance that meant delivering service without surrendering self-respect. Harder, riskier. But if she pulled it off, she might just reset the terms of engagement. Her mind ran through the principles she studied. Diffuse without submission. Set the frame early. Leave no opening for escalation. She took a slow breath, kept her voice level and said, 17 minutes exactly. I shall have the kitchen time the steak accordingly, and if it's 7's not perfect, I shall make sure you leave here with something better than you expected. The words hung there, polite, professional, but threaded with quiet certainty. Marcus studied her for a moment longer than usual, the kind of pause that meant he was recalculating. A server from another table glanced over, as if sensing something shifting in the air. And in that moment Alicia knew, this wasn't just lunch service. It was a test of dominance. She had made her choice. Now she'd have to live with it. From the outside, Alicia's movements looked routine, a server gliding between tables, jotting orders, checking water glasses. But every step was calculated. While Marcus scanned his phone, she walked past the bar, subtly signaling the sommelier to begin prepping his preferred wine. Not decanting it yet, just letting it breathe inside the bottle, a trick she'd learned from watching an old French maître to manage difficult patrons without ever appearing rushed. This was Alicia's hidden advantage. She didn't just serve food, she read people. Her time in hospitality had sharpened her observation skills to surgical precision. She knew Marcus liked control, so she gave him the illusion of it, confirming his unusual demands with steady eye contact, repeating them back without an ounce of hesitation. All the while, running her own clock in the background, the real one that would ensure the steak arrived perfect and her other tables didn't suffer. Here sits what that moment teaches us. Sometimes, the most effective power move isn't defiance, it's design. You let the other person think they've won the opening moves, while you quietly shape the entire board in your favor. By minute 8, the wine was in the decanter. By minute 10, Alicia had checked her other tables, swapped a side order for a guest with allergies, and slipped into the kitchen with Marcus's steak order. Warm rare, plate hot, she told the chef, and we still need it landing here in exactly 7 minutes. The chef raised an eyebrow, cutting it close. She smiled. Exactly. In psychology, this is called precision framing, narrowing the margin for error so the outcome feels inevitable. Marcus thought she was dancing to his rhythm. In truth, she was composing the entire score. As she returned to his table to refresh the breadbasket, he looked up from his phone. You stir fast, he said. Alicia simply replied, efficient. It wasn't a challenge. It was a breadcrumb, a hint that she was playing a different game. And while Marcus didn't notice it yet, the balance of power had already begun to tilt. At minute 16, everything began to unravel. The kitchen was humming at full tilt, when a sudden shout erupted from the prep station. The fryer had gone down, mid-service, flooding part of the floor with hot oil. Staff scrambled to contain it, but the disruption slowed ticket times across the board. For Alicia, this meant one thing. Marcus's steak, the exactly 17-minute steak, was now in jeopardy. She moved fast, threading between staff, checking the plating station. But the chef shook his head. 2 minutes behind, he said, almost apologetic. 2 minutes. In any normal setting it was nothing. But for Marcus, it was an opening, a chance to pounce, to call out failure in front of everyone. Alicia returned to the dining room, wine in hand. Marcus was already watching the clock on his phone, lips curling into that slow anticipatory smirk. You're late, he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. She placed the wine gently on the table. 2 minutes, she acknowledged. The kitchen had an unexpected delay. the steak is finishing now. Her voice was calm, but the murmurs had already started. A couple at the next table glanced over. A busboy paused mid-step. Marcus was making a show of it, and the restaurant was his stage. "You know what I pay for here?" Marcus said, leaning back so his voice carried. "I pay for precision. If you can deliver that, what's the point of this place?" The manager appeared at the edge of the room, drawn by the rising volume. Alicia felt the weight of the moment pressing in. One wrong move, and management would side with the paying billionaire, not the single mother on the floor. She took a slow breath, forcing her shoulders to stay level. But Marcus wasn't done. He gestured toward the nearest table, speaking as if addressing the whole room. "This," he said, motioning to Alicia, "is why standards are dying. People can follow simple instructions." The words stung, not just for their arrogance, but because they painted her as the problem in a room full of witnesses. Her cheeks burned. She could feel her colleagues' eyes on her. The humiliation was public, sharp, and deliberate. And for the first time in years, she felt her composure crack, just slightly. The fork in the road she'd chosen earlier suddenly seemed far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Still she held her ground. Because somewhere deep down she knew, if she folded now, she'd be folding for the rest of her time here. But she also knew, she needed a new plan. The manager's eyes were on her now, waiting to see how she'd diffuse this. Marcus leaned back, certain he'd broken her rhythm. The room seemed to hold its breath. And then, quietly without a hint of sarcasm, Alicia said, "Mr. Vale, I understand precision matters to you. Let's make this meal the standard you expect." It sounded like concession. But it wasn't. Because in her mind, something clicked. She remembered a lecture from her old behavioral psychology professor, one she'd nearly skipped because she was working a double shift at the time. The topic: control loops. The principle: when someone is attempting to dominate a situation, they thrive on your reaction. Break that loop, and they're forced to recalibrate. In that moment, Alicia realized Marcus didn't actually want the steak to be perfect. He wanted her to be flustered, defensive, off balance. If she denied him that, she denied him the win. So she decided on a new approach: exceed the request, while controlling the frame. She stepped away from the table, not hurried, not apologetic, and made her way to the kitchen. "Plate it with the truffle butter," she told the chef. "That's not what he ordered," the chef said. "It's complimentary, and it'll distract him long enough to reset the timing." She arranged for the sommelier to personally bring the wine, noting its decant time to the second. She added a side dish she knew from prior orders Marcus loved, but never asked for unless in a generous mood. And then she returned to the table with a calm, anchored posture, setting the wine down with an almost ceremonial care. 17 minutes, she said, checking her watch, "and I've taken the liberty of pairing it with something I think you still appreciate." Here's what that moment teaches us. A single action flipped the entire outcome, not because she fought back louder, but because she changed the rules he thought they were playing by. Marcus glanced at the side dish, his brow lifting in surprise. For the first time he didn't have a retort ready. The loop had broken. Marcus didn't thank her. He wasn't the type. But the side dish stayed untouched for exactly 3 seconds before he picked up his fork. Alicia noticed. And she filed it away. The rest of the service became an exercise in anticipation without intrusion. She adjusted his water glass before he reached for it. Replaced his bread basket the moment the second-to-last piece was gone. Checked the temperature of his coffee with a fingertip before pouring, ensuring it landed exactly at the warmth he liked. She did it all without hovering, without breaking the invisible perimeter he seemed to maintain around his space. The moves were subtle, almost invisible to an untrained eye. This was the silent climb. In negotiation theory, there's a concept called status reframing. You shift from being a subordinate to being an indispensable partner in the other person's goal. Alicia was doing exactly that. The other tables, still running smoothly. Her tips, likely rising from the impressed glances she caught from diners who noticed her composure. Even the manager, still watching from a distance, seemed less tense. But Marcus was beginning to adjust his posture. The smirk had softened into something more like curiosity. He wasn't used to someone navigating his demands without either groveling or fighting. When dessert came, Alicia didn't ask if he wanted it. She said, "The chef has prepared something you might appreciate, no charge." And when she set down the plate, she timed it so another table, a pair of high-profile clients Marcus clearly knew, was watching. That detail wasn't an accident. Here's what that moment teaches us. When dealing with someone who thrives on dominance, The goal isn't to crush them, it's to make them recalculate who they're dealing with. Respect earned without submission creates a shift they can't easily undo. By the time the check arrived, Marcus wasn't looking at the clock anymore. He was looking at Alicia. And that was the first sign he'd lost control of the narrative. By the time Alicia approached with the check, the restaurant had settled into a rhythm. Yet all eyes were subtly drawn to table 7, the billionaire who had been the source of tension for so long. Marcus reached for his wallet, confident, expecting her to stumble, to fumble the final act. Instead, Alicia placed the check beside him with deliberate calm. "You'll notice the bill reflects only what you ordered," she said, her voice steady. "And the dessert on the house." Marcus blinked. A pause. A flash of surprise. He didn't often encounter gestures without strings. But the true reversal wasn't sit in her words. It was in the audience around him. Other diners had noticed. The precision of her service under pressure. The way she handled interruptions with grace. The subtle cues that signaled she had orchestrated every step of the meal without ever breaking composure. Whispers started. "Who is she?" One of Marcus Sitt's peers, a prominent investor seated nearby, leaned toward him and said, "She handled that flawlessly." The billionaire Sepp's smirk wavered. He had expected submission, confrontation, or at worst, mediocrity. What he got instead was mastery, performed quietly, methodically, publicly undeniable. Here sits what that moment teaches us. Power isn't about volume, it's about precision, timing, and the ability to make the system bend without breaking yourself. Marcus tried to recover with a joke, a quip meant to reassert dominance. But the audience didn't sit laugh. Instead, admiration and respect quietly shifted toward Alicia, the single mother who had refused to be diminished. She didn't set shout. She didn't set gloat. Her victory was in the transformation of perception. And in that transformation, Marcus realized something he hadn't faced in years. Some people don't compete in your game. They rewrite it entirely. The room exhaled collectively, and in the silence that followed, Alicia returned to the floor, every movement calm, collected, yet unmistakably victorious. The public reversal wasn't just about Marcus being humbled. It was about the system bending, just a little, toward fairness, dignity, and respect. The lunch rush eventually faded into the quieter hum of the late afternoon. Tables cleared, chairs stacked, and the staff began whispering in the back, not about mistakes, but about Alicia's composure. Marcus Vail sat at table 7, quietly finishing his wine. He was instead angry, at least not outwardly. For the first time in years, someone had served him perfectly under impossible pressure without fear or submission. It unsettled him. A few days later, the restaurant manager approached Alicia. "We had feedback," he said. "From customers, from your peers, even from Mr. Vail himself. He specifically asked if you be available to train some new staff on handling high-pressure clients." Alicia didn't expect thanks. But here it was, recognition earned not by bending but by holding her ground intelligently. Marcus Vail himself sent a brief note. "Impressed by your precision. Lessons learned, MV." No ego games, no insults. Just acknowledgement that someone had rewritten the rules he thought he controlled. For Alicia, the victory was bigger than the tip or the praise. It was in seeing her colleagues inspired, watching them realize that resilience and strategy could change their working world. Here sits what that moment teaches us. The ripple effect of courage isn't always immediate. Quiet mastery can shift culture more than confrontation ever could. Integrity under pressure creates respect that survives beyond one encounter. Alicia returned home that evening, her daughter asleep, the small apartment filled with a sense of quiet triumph. It wasn't just a win for her. It was a lesson in strategic brilliance, moral courage, and transformation. She had faced the system, the bully, and the invisible hierarchy, and emerged not only unbroken, but elevated. Weeks after that fateful lunch, the story of Table 7 circulated quietly among the staff and loyal patrons. Alicia didn't seek attention. She didn't post on social media. Her victory was measured, internal and strategic, the kind that changes the landscape without a single shout. Marcus Vail continued to be a billionaire with influence, but there was a subtle shift in how his staff approached him, no longer with fear, but with mutual respect, because one person had shown him that mastery and composure matter more than intimidation. For Alicia, the impact went beyond that single meal. Her quiet confidence became a blueprint. For colleagues navigating toxic systems. For her daughter, who watched her mother hold her ground with dignity. For anyone who has ever felt small in a room designed to diminish them. Here sits the ultimate lesson this story teaches us. Courage isn't always loud, Power isn't always visible. True transformation happens when strategy meets integrity, and when you refuse to let someone else write your worth. She didn't need to dominate Marcus. She didn't need to be loud or defiant. She simply played a better game. And in doing so, she not only survived, she changed the rules for everyone who came after. So here sits the challenge to you, watching this story unfold. Where in your life are you quietly avoiding the table 7 moments? What system, person, or expectation are you bending to, without testing your own strength? A single deliberate action, like Alicia's measured approach, could flip your entire outcome. Remember, strategy, composure, and moral clarity are your greatest tools. Hold your ground, plan your moves, and when the moment comes, step forward with quiet mastery. If this story resonated with your values, your courage, or your strategy, like, comment, and subscribe, and carry this lesson forward into your own life. Because true power isn't given. It's claimed.